Imagine holding your child's hand, walking them to kindergarten, watching them giggle and play with dolls. Now stop. Imagine that same child, barely old enough to tie their own shoes, is not playing with dolls, but is a mother. Not a mother in a story, not a mother in a dream, but a real, biological mother. This isn't fiction. This is the unbelievable and deeply unsettling true story of Lina Medina, a girl from a remote village in the Andes Mountains of Peru, who became the youngest confirmed mother in world history at the age of 5 years, 7 months, and 21 days. How does a tragedy of this magnitude happen? Who was responsible? And what became of the baby and the girl whose childhood was stolen before it even began? Prepare yourself, because the questions surrounding this case are as shocking as the event itself. This is the story of a medical miracle and a human tragedy all wrapped into one. The year was 1939. High in the Peruvian Andes, nestled among the rugged peaks and thin air, was the small, poor, and isolated village of Tecrapo. This was the home of the Medina family. They lived a simple, subsistence life, far removed from the advancements and scrutiny of the modern world. Their daughter, Lina, was a little girl like any other in the village. She was 5 years old, small for her age, with big, curious eyes. But something was terribly wrong. Lina's parents, Tiburcio Medina and his wife, felt a growing sense of dread. Their little girl's belly was becoming swollen. Not just a little bit, but unnervingly large. In their remote community, where medical knowledge was often blended with folk remedies and superstition, the first suspicion among the villagers was a kind of spiritual curse or a severe ailment. Some worried she had a terrible tumor. They had no access to sophisticated doctors or hospitals. The local healers were baffled, and the swelling continued to grow, causing the young girl discomfort and worry. The pain, combined with the visible size of her abdomen, eventually convinced her father, Tiburcio, to take drastic action. He had to take her to a doctor. It was a long, arduous journey from Tecrapo to the nearest city with a proper clinic, the city of Pisco. The trip itself was likely several days of walking or travel by rough transport, a journey that would be difficult for an adult, let alone a sick 5-year-old. They finally arrived at the clinic, and Tiburcio, fearing the worst, presented his daughter to the doctor on duty. The doctor who examined Lina in Pisco was a man named Dr. Gerardo Lozada. He began a routine examination, expecting to find a large cyst or maybe a severe stomach infection, which were common in areas with poor sanitation. But as he examined the small, 5-year-old girl, the doctor's professional skepticism quickly turned to utter disbelief. What he found was not a tumor or a cyst. The examination revealed that Lina Medina was in the final stage of a full-term pregnancy. The swelling wasn't illness, it was a baby. Dr. Lozada had seen many things in his career, but this was unprecedented, an absolute medical impossibility in his mind. He quickly referred the young girl to a specialist in the capital city of Lima for further and more definitive confirmation. The stunning news was about to travel far beyond the confines of Tecrapo. The journey to Lima, the bustling capital of Peru, was an overwhelming experience for the Medina family. They were simple, poor villagers thrust into a sophisticated urban environment under the most shocking of circumstances. Lina, still just a child, was admitted to the Hospital Arzobispo Loaiza. It was here that she came under the care of a group of specialists who would confirm the Pisco doctor's unbelievable diagnosis. The medical team performed extensive tests, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Every single test confirmed the initial findings. Lina Medina was 8 months pregnant. The team noted that her physical development was astonishingly precocious. She had been menstruating since she was 8 months old, a condition known as precocious puberty. Her breasts were fully developed, and her hips had widened, giving her the physical characteristics of a mature woman, despite her chronological age of 5. Her skeleton was also significantly more developed than that of a typical child her age. She was, in short, a biological anomaly. This extreme form of precocious puberty meant that her body was racing through the stages of female development, reaching sexual maturity decades ahead of schedule. While cases of precocious puberty were known, nothing on this scale, resulting in a full-term pregnancy at age 5, had ever been documented. The medical community was stunned. The hospital staff, the doctors, and the local authorities were grappling with two separate, terrifying facts. a medical mystery that defied understanding, and a devastating crime that had taken place. The physicians who studied Lina were meticulous. They recorded every detail, knowing they were documenting a singular event in human history. The case quickly became the focus of intense local media attention, though the government and hospital tried to shield Lina as much as possible. The primary concern, however, was not the scientific novelty, but the immediate health and survival of the young mother and her unborn child. Lina herself, still so young, was likely unable to fully comprehend the life-altering circumstances that were swirling around her. She was just a small girl, suddenly the center of a monumental event, preparing for an ordeal that no 5-year-old should ever face. The world was watching, but for Lina, the reality was deeply personal and traumatic. Just a few weeks after her arrival and diagnosis in Lima, the moment arrived. Lina Medina went into labor. Given her extremely young age and the small size of her pelvis, a natural birth was impossible. Any attempt would have been catastrophic and life-threatening for both mother and child. On May 14, 1939, just a little over a month shy of her 6th birthday, Lina Medina was taken into surgery. A cesarean section, C-section, was performed by Dr. Lazada and Dr. Bisalyu, with Dr. Colorita providing anesthesia. The surgical procedure was successful, and a healthy baby boy was delivered. He weighed 2.7 kilograms, or about 6 pounds, and was perfectly normal. The medical team had successfully delivered the child, but the event itself remained a profound shock. The mother, Lina, was only 5 years old. The birth was documented and photographed extensively by the medical professionals, providing indisputable evidence of the event. The case had transitioned from a local curiosity to a global medical phenomenon. The doctors decided to name the boy Gerardo, after Dr. Gerardo Lazada, the physician who had first correctly diagnosed Lina and who had been instrumental in her care. Lina and her son remained in the hospital for observation and recovery. The immediate medical crisis had passed, but the humanitarian and legal crises were just beginning. With the baby's birth confirmed, the focus immediately shifted to the source of the pregnancy. Who was the father? This was not just a question of paternity, but a matter of a horrific crime. The Peruvian police launched an investigation. Lina, the only person who knew the truth, was too young to provide a coherent or reliable account of what had happened. She could not point to the perpetrator or explain the circumstances. Her answers were vague, often contradictory, and colored by the trauma and her limited understanding of the world. The police could only rely on the limited information they could gather. The most immediate and obvious suspect was her own father, Lina Medina. He was arrested on suspicion of sexual assault. However, due to a lack of evidence and the difficulty of questioning Lina, the authorities were forced to release him. The true identity of the baby's father remains one of the great, dark mysteries of the case, and the crime went unpunished. The little girl was left with a son and an unanswered question that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The reality of the situation was almost impossible to grasp. 5-year-old Lina, barely out of infancy herself, was now a mother to a healthy baby boy. The doctors and hospital staff knew that sending Lina and the baby, Gerardo, back to their remote village home immediately would be unsafe. Lina's parents, though now cleared of suspicion, were extremely poor and lacked the resources and education to manage such a profoundly complicated situation. So, Lina and Gerardo spent the first few years of the baby's life in Lima. They were under the care and protection of Dr. Gerardo Lazada, the physician who had first diagnosed Lina and performed the C-section. Dr. Lazada was instrumental in their early lives, providing shelter, food, and stability. He essentially became a guardian figure, trying to give both mother and son a chance at a life outside the crushing poverty and harsh conditions of Tecrapo. Lina's own mother, Tiburcio's wife, also spent time in Lima, helping to care for the infant and supporting her daughter, but the primary environment was set up by the hospital and Dr. Lazada. In this new, stable environment, a complex social dynamic emerged. Lina, still a child herself, didn't fully comprehend that the baby was her son. To her, he was simply her little brother. This was the story the adults decided to tell Gerardo as he grew up. Lina was his older sister. She played with him, cared for him in the simple ways a child can, and grew up alongside him. Lina's childhood, though permanently fractured by the traumatic event, had a semblance of normalcy in the form of play and sibling interaction with her own son. Gerardo grew up as a cheerful, healthy boy, completely unaware of the sensational story that surrounded his birth. He saw Lina as the older girl in the house, his sister, and the bond between them was genuine and loving. The doctors and those close to the family made a conscious effort to protect Gerardo from the truth, wanting him to have a normal childhood, free from the crushing weight of the world-shaking secret. This arrangement, where the daughter and son were raised as sister and brother, was the only way the adults felt they could shield both children from the truth and the public's relentless curiosity. It was a benevolent lie, but a ticking clock had been set on when the truth would inevitably come out. While Lina and Gerardo were living their quiet, shielded life in Lima, the international media was in a frenzy. The news of the 5-year-old mother was not just a sensation, it was a global phenomenon. Doctors, scientists, and journalists from around the world descended on Peru, desperate for details, interviews, and photographs. The scientific community was particularly fascinated. The case of Lina Medina was a medical textbook example of extreme precocious puberty, a biological event so rare and so profound that it challenged previous understandings of human development. The Peruvian government and the hospital tried their best to manage the media storm. There were offers of enormous sums of money from international publishing houses and even American showmen, like those who ran traveling circuses and sideshows, who wanted to bring Lina and Gerardo to the United States. These offers were vehemently rejected by Dr. Lozada and the authorities. They were determined that Lina and Gerardo would not be exploited or become a grotesque spectacle for public entertainment. Their priority was the welfare of the children, not profit or sensationalism. However, the sheer fame of the case made it impossible to maintain absolute secrecy. Photos of Lina holding her baby circulated globally. Reputable medical journals published detailed reports, complete with X-rays and case notes, confirming every aspect of the story. The medical findings were so clear and well documented that despite the unbelievable nature of the event, no credible challenge was ever raised against the authenticity of the birth. As Gerardo grew older, the secrecy became harder to maintain. Lima was not a big city in the same way New York or London was, and enough people knew the family's story. Whispers followed them. The other children in the neighborhood would sometimes tease Gerardo, making confusing, nasty remarks. He started to ask questions. Why did he look different? Why did everyone stare at his sister Lina? The adults around him, Dr. Lozada and the Medina family, had to constantly deflect and reassure him, but they knew they were running out of time. The longer the secret was kept, the more painful the eventual revelation would be. The world knew the truth, and soon, Gerardo would too. The inevitable happened when Gerardo was 10 years old. 10 is a pivotal age. It's when a child starts to transition from the protected world of early childhood to the awareness of adolescence. Gerardo, like any 10-year-old, was intelligent, curious, and sensitive to the social cues around him. The constant whispers and cryptic remarks from others finally broke through the protective bubble the adults had built. It is reported that one day, perhaps after a particularly cruel taunt from another child, Gerardo finally confronted Lina or one of the adults who was caring for him. He demanded to know the truth about his parentage and the strange circumstances of his life. The long-held, protective secret had reached its expiration date. The burden of the revelation fell upon the family. It was confirmed to Gerardo that Lina was not his sister, but his biological mother. The impact of this truth on a 10-year-old boy, who suddenly realized his sister was his mother and that she was only 5 years older than him, must have been devastatingly confusing and traumatic. He also had to confront the horror of his own existence. The truth that his birth was the result of a terrible crime and a staggering medical anomaly. Despite the shock and the initial difficulty of processing such an enormous truth, the bond between Lina and Gerardo did not break. If anything, the shared secret, the shared trauma, and the unusual circumstances of their life brought them closer. Lina, though still reserved and quiet, loved her son, and Gerardo understood that his mother was herself a victim, a child whose life had been irreparably damaged. With the truth out in the open, the family, now fully relocated to Lima, had to learn to live with the known facts. Lina never capitalized on her story. She remained a private person, avoiding the media and focusing on raising Gerardo and trying to build a normal life. This decision, to remain fiercely private, was a testament to her quiet dignity and a clear sign that she wanted no part of the sensationalism that surrounded her as the world's youngest mother. She simply wanted to be a person, not a headline. Despite the global fame and the tragedy that defined her early years, Lina Medina tried to pursue a normal life. After the intense media scrutiny of the 1940s began to fade, she focused on providing a stable future for herself and Gerardo. The doctors who had treated her, particularly Dr. Gerardo Lozada, continued to play a pivotal role in her life, recognizing their moral obligation to the young woman they had helped save. Dr. Lozada secured Lina a position as a secretary in his clinic in Lima. This provided her with steady employment and a modest income, a huge step up from the extreme poverty of her childhood village. This job was far more than just financial security. It was an opportunity for education and integration into modern city life. Lina, who had very little formal schooling due to her early life and the subsequent events, learned essential skills like reading, writing, and basic office administration. This was her chance to reclaim a small part of the education and development that had been stolen from her. She was known at the clinic for being quiet, reserved, and incredibly hardworking. She rarely spoke about her past and kept a stoic composure. She had an air of solemnity that was perhaps permanent, the shadow of her extraordinary experience never completely lifting. She kept her distance from the constant attempts by journalists and researchers to reopen her case or pay her for an interview. Lina was determined to live life on her own terms, defined by her actions as an adult and a mother, not by the circumstances of her birth. Gerardo benefited greatly from this stability. He was able to attend school and receive a proper education in Lima. He was an intelligent boy, and despite the trauma of learning the truth, he thrived in the nurturing, though unusual, environment provided by his mother and her professional guardian. This period was crucial for both of them, a time of quiet growth, stability, and the pursuit of a dignified, private existence, financed largely by the kindness and commitment of the medical professionals who believed in her future. This steady effort to build a normal life was Lina's silent rebellion against the spectacle the world had tried to make of her. As Lina grew into her 20s, she continued to work diligently and raise her son, Gerardo. While the world had largely forgotten the sensational headlines of 2 decades prior, the local community still knew her story. This made forming relationships difficult, as any potential partner would have to contend with her unique and traumatic history. However, in the mid-1950s, Lina met Raul Gerardo. He was a local man who saw past the sensationalism and recognized the quiet, strong woman who had faced unimaginable hardship. Raul accepted Lina completely, including her son Gerardo and the shadow of her past. They developed a genuine, loving, and stable relationship. In 1970, over 3 decades after the birth of Gerardo, Lina and Raul welcomed a second son into the world. This birth was, thankfully, completely normal and unremarkable from a medical standpoint. For Lina, this was an incredibly important milestone. It was a chance to experience motherhood in a way that was conventional and joyous, without the terrifying medical risks and the surrounding crime that marked Gerardo's birth. The arrival of their second son solidified their family unit. Lina and Raul eventually married, cementing their commitment to each other and their shared life. They purchased a modest home in a poor district of Lima called Chicago Chico, which translates to Little Chicago. It was a simple, humble home, but it was their own, a sanctuary built on stability, hard work, and mutual respect. Lina had finally found a sense of genuine belonging and peace. She was no longer just the youngest mother in the world. She was a wife and a mother to 2 sons, living a quiet, anonymous life, which was exactly what she had always desired. The traumatic events of 1939 had not defeated her. She had managed to construct a fortress of normalcy around herself and her loved ones. Gerardo, the son born of this extraordinary circumstance, grew up fiercely protective of his mother and deeply aware of his unique place in history. He benefited greatly from the stability provided by Dr. Lozada's support and his stepfather, Raul Gerardo. He was a hardworking and well-adjusted young man, despite the massive secret he had carried for the first decade of his life. Gerardo never sought fame or profit from his story. Like his mother, He actively avoided the press and researchers who periodically tracked them down, still desperate for an exclusive interview or a dramatic account of his life. He understood that his existence was a tragedy for his mother, and he preferred to honor her privacy and dignity. He pursued an education and eventually attended the National University of San Marcos in Lima, one of the most prestigious universities in Peru. This achievement was a testament to his intelligence and the family's dedication to a better future, far removed from the illiteracy and poverty of Tecrapo. He built a successful career and eventually moved away from the family home, establishing his own life and family. Gerardo's relationship with Lina remained strong and close. He was her firstborn, and she was his mother, no matter the circumstances. The unique and complex story of their origins bound them together. For decades, they lived side by side in Lima, a testament to resilience. They quietly navigated the challenges of life, always holding the secret of the father's identity close, protecting Lina from further pain and investigation. Gerardo was a devoted son, always there to protect his mother's peace and privacy, recognizing that she was the ultimate victim in a story that had astonished the world. His life was a quiet, profound success story, overcoming the worst possible start to build a life of dignity. Even as the years passed and Lina built her family life, the central, horrifying question of the case never went away. Who was Gerardo's father? This was the dark core of the story, the unsolved crime that overshadowed the medical miracle. The initial investigation in 1939 was swift and inconclusive. Lina's father, Tiburcio Medina, was arrested, but the police lacked concrete evidence and the critical testimony of a young, traumatized victim. Tiburcio was quickly released, and the case essentially went cold. In the small, tightly knit world of their remote village, rumors and suspicions lingered for years. Some whispers suggested a relative, perhaps an uncle or a cousin, might have been the perpetrator. Others speculated about a traveling worker or perhaps an unknown outsider. However, in the absence of forensic science or a clear witness statement, these were all merely guesses. Lina herself, throughout her entire life, maintained a silence about the identity of the father. This silence was not necessarily an attempt to protect the criminal, but a reflection of her profound trauma and developmental stage at the time of the event. A 5-year-old brain is incapable of processing and retaining the details of such a sexual assault in a coherent, reliable manner for later testimony. It is highly likely that Lina either suppressed the memory, was unable to identify the assailant, or simply didn't understand the gravity of what had happened to her. For the authorities, the difficulty of the case was compounded by the remote location and the time elapsed. The case remained open officially, but actively pursuing new leads became nearly impossible decades later. The failure to identify and punish the person responsible meant that a child predator escaped justice, allowing the tragedy to remain eternally incomplete. Lina chose to live with the unanswered question, prioritizing her mental peace and the stability of her family over reopening a painful and likely fruitless investigation. The identity of Gerardo's father remains one of the most enduring, tragic secrets of the 20th century. Lina Medina's life was defined by her fierce desire for privacy, but the outside world was constantly attempting to turn her tragedy into profit. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, as she was raising her sons and working in Lima, she was bombarded with offers. American and European journalists, documentary makers, and even filmmakers saw her story as a goldmine. One of the most persistent attempts to exploit her came in 1951. An American show business impresario named Edgar M. Hollowell arrived in Peru, attempting to secure exclusive rights to Lina's life story. He offered the family substantial sums of money, promising fame and fortune in the United States. Dr. Lazada, who had helped protect Lina from exploitation since 1939, once again intervened. He and the Peruvian authorities strongly advised Lina against any contract that would force her into the limelight. There were also efforts by international medical institutions to study her further. While Lina participated in the necessary, life-saving medical procedures and allowed her initial case to be documented for science, she refused to become a lifelong subject for research. She understood that her case was important, but she drew a firm boundary between scientific inquiry and personal exploitation. The offers continued even when she was a mature woman. People tried to bribe her neighbors, her colleagues, and even her family members for information or a photograph. Despite her modest income and the potential life-changing money being offered, Lina stood firm. She rejected every single offer, choosing dignity over wealth, and choosing the quiet anonymity of her home over the bright, intrusive lights of international attention. Her rejection of fame was a powerful statement. Her life was hers, not a commodity for the world to consume. This quiet resilience became as much a part of her story as the unbelievable circumstances of her first pregnancy. Lina Medina lived most of her adult life in the modest, zinc-roofed house in the Chicago Chico district of Lima. She never became rich, but she achieved something far more valuable to her: a normal, stable existence. Her life was characterized by hard work, dedication to her family, and a constant, unwavering refusal to discuss the events of 1939. She was a mother, a wife, and a neighbor. To those who knew her locally, she was simply Senora Gerardo, a reserved but kind woman. She managed to completely disappear into the anonymity of her community. She didn't seek pity or recognition. Her daily life was routine, working at the clinic until Dr. Lozada passed away, then perhaps selling handmade goods or doing small jobs to supplement the family income, and always prioritizing her sons. Her son Gerardo remained her greatest achievement. He had grown up successfully and gone on to build his own life. The fact that the boy, born under such tragic circumstances, became a successful, well-adjusted adult was the ultimate victory for Lina. In 1979, the family faced a terrible loss. Gerardo, Lina's firstborn son, passed away at the age of 40 due to complications from a bone marrow disease. This was a devastating blow. The boy who represented both the greatest tragedy and the greatest love of her life was gone. This loss reinforced Lina's already powerful need for privacy, making her retreat even further from the public eye. After Gerardo's death, she moved more fully into the shadows, a quiet, aging woman carrying the weight of an extraordinary history and a personal grief few could understand. She continued to live her life as privately as possible, ensuring that the legacy she left was one of resilience, not sensationalism. Despite Lina's lifelong commitment to privacy, her story was occasionally brought back into the public eye, often against her wishes. One significant moment occurred around 2002. A Peruvian journalist, wanting to commemorate the history of the case and its medical significance, made contact with the Medina family and published some of the final known details about Lina's life. By this time, Lina was in her 60s and living a very quiet life with her husband, Raul. The article confirmed that she was still living in the modest home in Chicago Chico, still working occasionally, and still fiercely protective of her past. The article also included one of the very few pictures of Lina as an adult, taken from a distance, showing a quiet, reserved woman whose face carried the lines of a difficult life. The publication of these details served as a final confirmation to the outside world that Lina Medina was alive and well, though she continued to refuse all interviews and public appearances. The article also reiterated the central facts of the case, ensuring that the medical record remained clear. The birth was real, documented by X-rays, medical records, and photographs. The scientific community never wavered in its acceptance of the case as the most extreme example of precocious puberty leading to childbirth. This brief reappearance in the news was a double-edged sword. It satisfied the world's lingering curiosity, but also reminded Lina of the trauma she carried. She and Raul lived a life of deep poverty, despite the millions of dollars her story was worth. They were, at times, reduced to financial hardship, yet she never once considered selling her story. This steadfast adherence to personal dignity, even in the face of need, is the final, compelling detail of her character. She chose her quiet suffering over the loudness of exploitation, reinforcing her legacy as a victim who refused to be defined by her trauma. Lina Medina's case remains one of the most studied and cited events in medical history. The fact that a 5-year-old girl could carry a pregnancy to term and give birth to a healthy baby boy fundamentally changed the understanding of female reproductive biology. She provided the world with the most extreme documented example of precocious puberty, forcing doctors and researchers to accept the incredible biological potential of the human body. Her case confirmed that when the pituitary gland and the hormones it controls are activated decades too early, the body can physically mature at an astonishing rate. Her body was biologically ready to conceive and carry a child, even though her mind was that of a small child. The medical documentation, which includes the detailed reports, the X-rays showing the fetal skeleton, and the surgical notes from the C-section, is absolutely definitive. For medical science, Lina Medina is not a sensational story, but a crucial data point that expanded the known limits of human physiological development. However, the case is equally important for its profound humanitarian and ethical implications. It serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of children, the devastating effects of sexual abuse, and the failure of justice. Lina Medina was not just a medical phenomenon. She was a victim of a horrific crime. Her story highlights the complex relationship between a child's biological maturity and her cognitive and emotional readiness, a gap that resulted in the permanent theft of her childhood. Her resilience, her ability to raise her son, and her determined pursuit of a private, dignified life are perhaps her greatest human legacy. She demonstrated that even after suffering unimaginable trauma, a person can carve out a life of quiet strength and normalcy, refusing to let one single, devastating event define her entire existence. Lina Medina lived out her remaining years in the company of her husband, Raul, and her surviving son, finding peace in their humble home. She remained a fixture in her neighborhood, known for her stoicism and her deep desire for anonymity. She rarely ventured far from her home and never once granted a formal, recorded interview about the events that made her name famous, successfully keeping the deepest details of her trauma private until the end. Her husband, Raul Gerardo, passed away in 2008. His death was another quiet loss for Lina, leaving her without the man who had given her stability, love, and protection for over 5 decades. She continued to be supported by her second son, maintaining her simple life, far from the public eye and the relentless curiosity of the world. Lina Medina herself passed away in 2015 at the age of 81. Her death, much like her adult life, was private and quiet. There were no major news reports, no massive funerals, and no public statements from the family. She was buried simply, finally finding absolute peace after a life that began with an event that shocked the entire planet. Her passing marked the end of the last living witness to one of the greatest medical and criminal mysteries of the 20th century. She died as she lived, as a quiet, dignified woman who was first and foremost a mother, not a headline. Her story is a complex tapestry woven from tragedy, biology, and unbelievable human resilience. It is a story that started with a devastating crime against a child and ended with an old woman who fought for, and finally won, the right to a private life. Lina Medina may have been the world's youngest mother, but her greatest accomplishment was simply living, quietly and bravely, until the end. The story of Lina Medina is incredibly difficult to process. It's a profound intersection of the miraculous and the tragic. We are left with two enduring images: the small, 5-year-old girl giving birth in a hospital in Lima, and the quiet, elderly woman who refused to ever let the world truly see her pain. She protected herself and her children until her last breath, turning a global spectacle into a fiercely guarded family history. It makes you wonder, if you had a story that could make you rich, but that story was the source of your greatest trauma, would you choose dignity or profit? What would you do? Thank you for listening to this remarkable and painful chapter of history. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts on Lina's incredible resilience, and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into history's most compelling stories.